When my parents decided to leave me with nothing and give my sister $8 million, I thought my life was over. But what none of them expected was that my grandfather wasn't going to stay silent, and the lesson he taught them changed everything. I used to think that the cruelest thing parents could ever do to their child was abandon them. But I was wrong. There's something even worse. It's when they keep you around, but make it painfully clear every single day that you are not the one they wanted. That was my childhood. My name is Elena. I'm 27 years old now, but the wounds of growing up in my family still ache like fresh scars. And the story I'm about to tell you is not just about betrayal. It's about what happens when favoritism, greed, and arrogance push a family past the point of no return. Ever since I can remember, my sister, Lila, was the star of the family. She was the one with the golden hair, the sparkling laugh, the kind of girl people adored instantly. If she wanted something, she got it. If she made a mistake, it was forgiven before she even had to apologize. And if she succeeded at anything, the whole world had to stop and applaud. I, on the other hand, was background noise. I was quieter, more reserved, and maybe that made me easier to overlook. When I brought home good grades, my parents barely blinked. When I won a regional writing contest in high school, my mom just said, "That's nice, dear," before turning back to watch Lila practice her piano piece. Lila didn't just play piano. She was brilliant at it. Every recital, she'd walk onto the stage in her shimmering dress while my parents sat in the front row, recording every second, clapping as if she had just performed at Carnegie Hall. And me, I was always sitting in the shadows, clapping too, pretending it didn't hurt. The thing about favoritism is that it's not always loud. It's not always about yelling or insults. Sometimes it's in the silences, the moments when you're invisible. When birthdays rolled around, my parents would throw Lila grand parties at fancy venues. For me, it was a cake at home, if that. Once, when I turned 16, my parents forgot it was even my birthday. I remember sitting in my room that night, watching the candle on a small cupcake I bought for myself burn down. I told myself it was okay. I told myself I didn't need attention, that I was stronger for being ignored. But inside, it broke something. Still, I survived. I learned to find joy in little things: reading late at night, sketching in my notebook, walking under the stars. Those were my escapes. The true fracture in my family didn't come until years later, though. By the time I was 26, I had moved into a small apartment, working as a freelance graphic designer. I wasn't rich, but I was proud of the life I built. It was mine, and it was free of their coldness. One Sunday afternoon, I got a call from my mother. "Elena," she said, her tone unusually formal, "your father and I would like you to come to the house tonight. There's something we need to discuss as a family." Something in her voice made my stomach tighten. I hadn't been to their house in months, but that evening I drove over. Their mansion looked the same as always: grand, polished, cold. When I walked into the living room, I saw them all sitting there. My mother and father on the sofa, Lila sitting smugly beside them, sipping champagne. And in the corner, quietly observing, was my grandfather. That surprised me. Grandpa usually stayed at his own estate. He rarely involved himself in my parents' business. "Sit down, Elena," my father said. His tone was clipped, businesslike. I sat, feeling out of place. My mother folded her hands. "We've updated our will," she said. "We wanted you both to hear it directly from us, so there's no confusion later. My chest tightened. I hadn't expected this. Then came the blow. Lila will inherit the estate, my father continued. That includes the house, the properties and a trust fund of $8 million. I blinked. 8 million? He nodded, calm as ever, and me. I asked, my voice already breaking. My mother didn't flinch. We've decided not to leave you anything, Elena. It's not that we don't care, but you've chosen a modest life for yourself. We believe you don't need our wealth the way Lila does. I couldn't breathe. My hands trembled. Lila smirked. She didn't even try to hide it. Don't take it personally, sis, she said. Some people are just meant to shine brighter than others. Her words cut through me like a knife. I wanted to scream, to ask them how they could do this, to remind them that I was their daughter too. But the words stuck in my throat. All I could do was stare at them, my chest heavy with betrayal. Through it all, Grandpa sat in the corner, saying nothing. His eyes, though, were sharp, watching, studying. When I finally stumbled out of the house that night, I remember passing by him. For the briefest second, his hand brushed mine, steady and firm. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. Something in his look told me, this isn't over. I drove back to my apartment in silence, tears blurring my vision. $8 million. They could have split it. They could have given me even a fraction. But instead, they made their choice loud and clear. I didn't matter. I never had. That night, I curled up on my couch, shaking, broken. I told myself I'd move on, that I didn't need them. But in the pit of my stomach, there was a fire burning. It wasn't just sadness anymore. It was anger. And though I didn't know it yet, that anger would soon change everything, because someone else had been watching. Someone else had a plan, and that someone was my grandfather. I couldn't sleep that night. The more I thought about it, the more the betrayal ate at me. My parents had spoken those words with such calmness, as if they were giving away some meaningless object, not their daughter's future. And the way my sister smiled, almost taunting me, it replayed over and over in my mind like a cruel melody I couldn't shut off. By morning, my eyes were swollen from crying. I tried to distract myself with work, but my hands trembled so much on the keyboard that I couldn't finish a single project. Every thought circled back to the same truth. They had chosen her. Again. Just like always, 2 days later, there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, I nearly froze. My grandfather stood there, tall, composed, wearing his usual dark suit even though it was a warm afternoon. His presence filled the small hallway of my apartment, and for a moment, I almost felt like a child again, small, uncertain, unworthy. "Grandpa," I whispered, not sure why he had come. "May I come in, Elena?" His voice was steady, calm, but there was something sharp beneath it. I stepped aside and let him in. He looked around my modest living room without judgment, just quiet observation. Then he sat down on the edge of my couch, folding his hands on his knee the way he always did when he was about to say something serious. "I was there that night," he began. "I heard everything your parents said." The shame rushed back into me like a tide. I lowered my eyes, hugging my arms around myself. "It's fine, Grandpa. I've learned to expect it by now. Is it fine?" he asked, his tone cutting through my words. I swallowed hard. It's not like I can change who they are. They've never seen me the way they see Lila. And now, well, I guess they just made it official. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, slowly, he leaned forward. His eyes locked on mine, and I felt the weight of a man who had lived long enough to see every shade of human cruelty. Elena, I need you to understand something. What they did wasn't just favoritism. It was cruelty. And cruelty must never go unanswered. His words startled me. What do you mean? I mean, he said, his voice lowering, that you have been wronged in a way that cuts deeper than money. They stripped you of dignity, as if you were invisible. That kind of wound, it festers, unless it's confronted. I shook my head. But what can I do, Grandpa? I don't have power. I don't have influence. I can't fight them. His mouth curved into the faintest smile, not warm, but knowing. You don't need to fight them, Elena. That's my job. I stared at him, confused. He leaned back, his gaze turning distant, almost as if he were recalling a lifetime of secrets. Your father and mother have always been blinded by appearances. They value wealth because they believe it makes them superior. What they don't know is that my wealth far surpasses theirs. The room seemed to grow still around me. What? I whispered. I built my fortune quietly, he continued. Investments, properties, international partnerships, things your father never cared to understand. I allowed him to believe he was the successful one, that he had outgrown me. But the truth is, his empire is small compared to mine. I sat frozen, my heart pounding in my chest. Grandpa's eyes sharpened. I've been waiting, Elena. Waiting to see who in this family has true character. And now I have my answer. Your parents' decision to abandon you in favor of their favorite child has revealed their greed, their blindness. They don't deserve my legacy. You do. My throat tightened. Me. But why me? Because, child, he said, his voice softening for the first time, you have known pain. You have known struggle. And still, you did not let it corrupt you. That is the kind of strength that carries true wealth, true power. Lila has only known indulgence. Your parents have only known arrogance. They will destroy themselves with it. You, however, you are different. I couldn't speak. Tears blurred my vision. For years, I had been invisible. And now, here was the one person I never expected, telling me I mattered more than all of them combined. Grandpa reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a slim leather folder. He placed it on the table in front of me. This, he said, is the beginning. Inside, you'll find documents for a trust in your name. It's not the full picture only. A portion. Enough to give you independence, security, and the ability to grow. The rest will come when the time is right. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were bank documents, property titles, investments worth more than I could comprehend. My entire body felt like it had gone numb. Why are you giving this to me now? I whispered. Because, he said firmly, they believe they've already won. They believe they've crushed you. But nothing is more dangerous than underestimating the one you've dismissed. And Elena, I want you to remember this. The best revenge is not in anger. It is in proving them wrong. The fire that had been smoldering in me for days suddenly roared to life. For the first time, I didn't feel powerless. I felt chosen. As my grandfather rose to leave, he rested his hand on my shoulder. Stay silent for now. Do not reveal what I've given you. Let them believe you are weak. Let them grow comfortable in their arrogance. Their downfall will come naturally. And when it does, you will be ready. I stood frozen at the door long after he left, clutching the folder to my chest. My heart was racing, my mind spinning. I had walked into that night at my parents' house, feeling like nothing. And now, suddenly, I held the key to a power they couldn't even imagine. They thought they had broken me. But they had no idea what was coming, and the days that followed, I felt like I was living in two different worlds. In one, I was still the forgotten daughter, the girl my parents had left behind without hesitation, the sister who had been laughed at for not being good enough. Whenever I thought about that night, about my father's calm voice telling me I would get nothing, it still made my chest ache. But in the other world, the secret one, something new had been born inside me. Power, security, a seed of confidence I had never felt before. I kept the folder hidden in my desk drawer, but just knowing it was there changed everything. I wasn't trapped anymore. I wasn't at their mercy. For once, I had something they didn't know about, and it gave me a strange sense of calm. Still, pretending was harder than I thought. My sister wasted no time flaunting her inheritance. She posted photos online of herself in expensive boutiques, posing beside brand new sports cars, sipping champagne on rooftop bars. The comments were full of envy and admiration, and she soaked it all up like sunlight. One evening, my phone buzzed with a message from her. I opened it, and there was a picture of her holding designer shopping bags, grinning ear to ear. Perks of being the favorite, she wrote. My stomach turned. She knew exactly what she was doing. She wanted me to feel small, to rub salt in the wound. And for a moment, it worked. I stared at that photo, the old anger burning in my chest. But then I remembered Grandpa's words. Stay silent. Let them believe you are weak. So I didn't reply. I let her bask in her arrogance, knowing she was only digging herself deeper. Weeks went by and Lila's spending spiraled. Every time I saw her, she was dripping in new jewelry, driving another new car, bragging about the empire she was going to build. But what she didn't realize, what none of them realized, was that her so-called empire was already crumbling, because money without wisdom is a fire. It burns bright, then consumes everything. My parents, of course, were blind to it. They praised her constantly, telling anyone who would listen how proud they were of their brilliant daughter. Sometimes I wondered if they even remembered they had another child, but Grandpa, he saw it all. One evening, he called me again. This time, he asked me to come to his estate. I hadn't been there in years. When I arrived, I was reminded of just how vast his world was. The house wasn't just a home, it was practically a fortress. Old oak doors, sprawling gardens, rooms lined with shelves of books that smelled like history itself. He welcomed me into his study, where a fire crackled in the hearth. Papers and ledgers were stacked neatly on his desk, and behind him hung a portrait of my grandmother, stern and elegant. You've been patient, he said, studying me. That is good. Patience is the foundation of strategy. I sat down, still unsure why he had called me. He leaned forward. Your sister is burning through her inheritance faster than I predicted. It will not last long. When it runs out, your parents will scramble to protect her, because they have always mistaken indulgence for love. That is when their walls will begin to crack. You must be ready for that moment. I frowned. Ready how? By preparing yourself, not just with money, but with strength, with vision. You will not only survive their downfall, you will rise above it. There was something about the way he said it, as if he had already mapped out every step, that sent a shiver through me. That night, after I returned home, I lay awake thinking about his words. For so long, I had been reacting to my family hurt by them, ignored by them, left behind by them. But for the first time, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was waiting, watching, planning, and deep down, I knew he was right. Their arrogance was a weapon that they didn't even realize was aimed at themselves. It didn't take long before the cracks began to show. One afternoon, I got another message from Lila, but this one was different. Her tone wasn't smug, it was panicked. "Hey, do you know anything about investments? I think I messed up. Dad says it'll be fine, but I don't know. Call me." I stared at the message for a long time, my heart pounding. Part of me wanted to call her, to ask what had happened. Another part of me remembered the folder in my desk, the fire in Grandpa's eyes, the years of silence I had endured while she was worshipped and I was forgotten. In the end, I didn't call her. I didn't reply at all. Instead, I sat there in the quiet of my apartment, and for the first time in my life, I allowed myself a small, knowing smile, because this was only the beginning. Their downfall was coming, and when it arrived, I would be ready. It started small. At first, my sister's panic seemed almost laughable, an overreaction from someone who had never dealt with real consequences. She had spent her life floating on cushions of praise and money, never once facing failure. So when her first investment didn't turn into the overnight fortune she expected, she spiraled. She called me again a few days later, this time leaving a voicemail. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "Elena, I don't know what I did wrong. They told me it was a sure thing. But now the money's, it's not there anymore. Dad says he'll fix it, but I can't sleep. I keep thinking I've ruined everything. Can you just call me back, please?" I listened to it twice, and then I deleted it. I knew what she was feeling: panic, helplessness. I had lived in that space for years, trying to prove myself to people who refused to see me. But the difference was that when it happened to me, no one came to help. And now she was finally tasting a fraction of that bitter loneliness. I didn't feel sorry for her. Not anymore. It didn't take long before the whispers started. At family gatherings, I overheard relatives murmuring that Lila was reckless, that her big empire was built on sand. My parents brushed it off, insisting that everything was under control. But even I could see the strain in their eyes. One evening, my father called me. That alone was unusual. He rarely reached out to me unless it was out of obligation. "Elena," he said, his voice tight, "we need you to come over for dinner. Your mother and I. We have some things to discuss." For a moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, they were going to apologize. Maybe they had realized how unfair they'd been, how much damage their favoritism had caused. My heart, despite everything, still longed for that tiny miracle of acknowledgement. But when I arrived at the mansion, it was clear that wasn't the case. The dining table was set, the room filled with its usual cold elegance. My mother sat rigid, her hands wrapped tightly around her wine glass. Lila sat beside her, pale and shaken, her usual smugness gone. My father looked at me like I was some business associate he had no choice but to deal with. "We'll get straight to the point," he said. "Your sister has made some poor choices. Some investments didn't go as planned. A large portion of her inheritance is gone." Lila buried her face in her hands. I stayed silent. My mother cleared her throat. "We've decided that it's time for the family to pull together. We're asking if you can help. Just temporarily, of course. You've always been so stable." The words almost made me laugh. Stable. That was the best they could come up with. They hadn't cared when I was struggling to pay my rent, when I was skipping meals to afford my own college textbooks. But now that their golden child was drowning, Suddenly my stability mattered. How exactly do you expect me to help? I asked, my voice even. Whatever you can spare, my father said. Alone. We'll pay you back once things recover. I wanted to laugh in their faces, but instead, I glanced at Lila. Her eyes were red, her voice small. Please, Elena. I didn't mean for this to happen. I thought I could prove to everyone that I could grow the money, make it even bigger. I don't know what I'm doing. I almost felt pity. Almost. But then I remembered her smirk when she sent me that photo, her cruel little message about being the favorite. And whatever pity I felt turned to stone. I'm sorry, I said softly. I don't have anything to give. The silence at that table was deafening. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line. My father's jaw tightened. And Lila just stared at me, disbelief written all over her face. You're her sister, my mother hissed finally. How can you just sit there and watch her suffer? I held her gaze. How could you sit there and watch me suffer for years? For a moment, no one spoke. My words hung in the air like smoke they couldn't breathe through. I stood up, smoothing my hands against my dress. I think we're done here. As I walked out of that mansion, my heart was pounding. Not with fear, not with sadness, but with something else entirely, something sharper, stronger. For the first time in my life, I had said what I needed to say, and it had left them speechless. That night, when I told Grandpa what had happened, he simply nodded. His eyes gleamed with a satisfaction I had never seen before. They've begun to feel the weight of their choices, he said. Good. Let them feel it. Their foundation is cracking. All you need to do is stay steady. I asked him what would happen next. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that comes from knowing exactly how the future will play out. Next, my dear, they will fall. And when they do, you will rise. After that dinner, something shifted inside me. I had walked into their house expecting to feel small again, expecting to live in tears like I always did. But instead, I walked out taller, steadier. For once, I hadn't begged them to see me. I hadn't tried to prove myself. I had simply stood my ground and told them the truth. And the look on their faces, it told me everything. They weren't just shocked. They were afraid. Word traveled quickly after that. My relatives, who once treated me like an afterthought, started calling more often. They wanted to know why my parents had cut me out of the will, why they had given everything to Lila only to watch it all crumble. I didn't give them details. I just let the questions swirl. Meanwhile, Lila's life began to unravel in ways that almost seemed poetic. The friends who had cheered her on when she was throwing money around slowly started disappearing. Invitations to parties, trips, dinners, they all dried up when her spending did. The same people who had once called her the star of the family now whispered about her recklessness. I saw her one afternoon by chance at a CAF near my apartment. She didn't notice me at first. She sat hunched over her phone, her hair messy, her makeup smudged, scrolling furiously through what looked like bank statements. The expensive jewelry was still there, but it looked out of place on her trembling hands. For a moment, I almost walked over. Some part of me wanted to reach out to tell her she wasn't alone. But then I remembered the years she had spent reminding me I was nothing. The times she laughed when my parents dismissed me. The messages she sent just to twist the knife deeper. So instead, I watched quietly as she wiped her eyes, slammed her phone down, and stormed out. That night, Grandpa called me again. He always seemed to know the exact moment I needed him. They came to me today, he said, his voice calm but edged with amusement. Your parents. They asked for my help. Claimed it was just temporary, that Lila had made a few mistakes but could recover with the right support. They wanted money. My chest tightened. What did you say? He chuckled softly, a sound that carried more weight than laughter. I told them I will not throw my fortune into a pit dug by arrogance. You should have seen their faces. They are not used to hearing the word no. I leaned back on my couch, a smile tugging at my lips. They'll hate that. They do, he agreed. But their hatred means nothing. What matters is that they are learning slowly, painfully, that the world does not bend for them. And you, Elena, must learn something too. What's that? I asked. That revenge is not fire. It is not fury. It is patience. It is watching them walk into their own ruin while you remain untouched. That is the lesson I want you to understand. His words sank deep into me. For so long, I had thought of revenge as something sharp, something loud, screaming at them, throwing their cruelty back in their faces. But he was right. Revenge didn't have to be loud. Sometimes, the quietest revenge was the strongest of all. A week later, my parents called me again. This time, there was no pretense of politeness. My mother's voice cracked as she spoke. Elena, we need you to reconsider. Lila's situation is worse than we thought. The debts, I interrupted. She hesitated, then sighed. Yes, some of the investments weren't just losses. They were loans from people who aren't exactly patient. If we don't fix this soon, it could get very dangerous. For a moment, I was stunned. Lila hadn't just wasted her inheritance, she had gambled it away into the hands of people who would not forgive her so easily. And you want me to help? I said flatly. You're her sister. My father snapped, as if that alone was reason enough. Family helps each other. I almost laughed. Family helps each other. Where was that philosophy when they left me with nothing? When they forgot my birthdays? When they watched me struggle without lifting a finger? I took a deep breath. I'm sorry. I can't help you. Elena, my mother began, but I cut her off. You made your choice. You gave her everything and left me with nothing. Now you can live with that decision. And with that, I ended the call. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty for saying no. I didn't feel like the unwanted child, begging for scraps of love. I felt free. That night, I sat by my window, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, my sister was probably crying herself to sleep. My parents were pacing their grand mansion in panic, and my grandfather was smiling quietly in his study, and me. I finally felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be, because, for once, I wasn't the one breaking apart. They were. It didn't take long for the word debts to take on a life of its own. At first, I thought maybe my parents had exaggerated, that they were just panicking because their perfect daughter had lost her shine. But then the phone calls began, not to me at least, not directly. But I started hearing whispers. One of my old friends who still lived near my parents mentioned strange men showing up at the mansion. Cars parked outside late at night. Men who didn't look like bankers or lawyers, but the kind who carried the kind of weight that didn't need weapons. To make a point, Lila had borrowed from the wrong people. I shouldn't have been surprised. She was always drawn to shortcuts, to fast money, to the thrill of having more than everyone else. And when her inheritance started draining faster than she could spend it, I could imagine exactly how it happened. Some smooth-talking stranger probably promised her a miracle, a way to double her fortune overnight. And she, desperate to keep the image alive, said yes. Now the miracle was turning into a nightmare. One evening, I received a text message from my mother. It wasn't long, just 3 words, please. Help us. I stared at it for a long time. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, but I couldn't bring myself to reply. I could almost hear her voice, the same voice that once told me I didn't need their wealth, the same voice that dismissed my tears when I was a child. Now she needed me. But I felt nothing except a cold, quiet clarity. Later that night, my phone rang again. This time, it was Grandpa. "Elena," he said, his tone as calm as always, "they are in deeper trouble than they realize. Your sister's arrogance has attracted sharks, and your parents, in their desperation, are making reckless promises." "What kind of promises?" I asked. "The kind they cannot keep. They've offered pieces of what they don't even fully own. They've lied to protect her, and lied always demand payment." A chill ran through me. What's going to happen to them? He paused for a long time. "They will learn. And learning, my dear, is never painless." I hesitated. Should I feel bad for them? His voice softened, but only slightly. "Compassion is a noble thing, but so is truth. And the truth is, they chose this path. Do not let misplaced pity blind you to what is happening. This is not your burden to carry." When the call ended, I sat in silence, staring at the city lights outside my window. For the first time in my life, I realized I wasn't on the outside anymore. I wasn't the forgotten daughter watching from the shadows. I was the one holding the steady ground, while the people who had always towered over me crumbled. Days later, I found out just how desperate they had become. I was walking home from the grocery store when I saw my father's car parked near my building. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but then I saw him step out. He looked tired, older somehow, his suit wrinkled in a way I had never seen before. "Elena," he called, his voice strained. I stopped on the sidewalk, clutching the bag of groceries against my chest. "What are you doing here?" "I needed to see you," he said quickly. We don't have much time. Your mother doesn't know I came." Something in his eyes unsettled me. They weren't the confident, dismissive eyes of the man I grew up with. They were the eyes of someone cornered. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Listen to me. I know we haven't always treated you fairly. I know we made mistakes. But right now, your sister's in danger. Real danger. These people she owes, they don't care about excuses. If we don't come up with the money soon, I don't know what they'll do." I stayed still, my heart pounding. "Please," he whispered. "You're the only one who can help. I don't care where the money comes from. If you have anything at all, give it to me. I'll fix this. I promise." For a moment, I almost broke. He looked so desperate. So unlike the man who had once looked through me as if I didn't exist. But then I remembered that night in the mansion. His voice, so calm, telling me I would get nothing. My mother's eyes, cold as stone. Lila's smirk, dripping with cruelty. I took a deep breath. "You promised me nothing," I said quietly. "And now I have nothing to give you." His face crumpled. Just for a second, before he caught himself. He straightened his shoulders, trying to salvage what dignity he had left. But I saw the truth in his eyes. He knew I wasn't lying. He knew I wasn't going to save them. Without another word, he turned and walked back to his car. I stood there on the sidewalk, my heart racing, the bag of groceries trembling in my hands, and that's when it hit me. This was the lesson Grandpa wanted me to see. Revenge didn't require me to raise my voice, to throw their cruelty back in their faces. All I had to do was stand still, steady, while they collapsed under the weight of their own choices. For once, I wasn't the one chasing after scraps of love. They were the ones chasing me. And I wasn't going to give them what they wanted. I didn't hear from my father again after that night outside my apartment. Not directly, at least. But the silence wasn't comforting, it was heavy, full of things left unsaid. And as the weeks passed, the cracks in my family grew deeper, sharper, like glass splintering under pressure. It was my mother who finally reached out. She showed up at my workplace of all places. I had just finished a long day, my voice hoarse from back-to-back meetings, when I saw her waiting by the entrance. She looked so out of place, perfectly styled hair, designer scarf, but eyes swollen as if she hadn't slept in days. "Elena," she said softly, almost pleading. I froze. My co-workers glanced at us curiously, but I waved them off. We stepped aside, into the quiet corner of the lobby. Her hands trembled as she spoke. "Your sister. She's in trouble. Worse trouble than we thought. These men, they've started showing up at the house, at my work. I'm scared." The woman who once told me I wasn't worthy of their fortune now stood before me, voice breaking. I should have felt vindicated. I should have smiled and thought, finally, you know how it feels, but all I felt was this strange, bittersweet ache. A part of me still wanted her to look at me not with desperation, but with love. With the kind of love I had begged for as a child. She reached out, grabbing my arm. "Please, Elena. You're the only one who can talk to your grandfather. He listens to you. If you ask him, maybe he'll help us." There it was. Not love, not care. Just another transaction. Another way to use me. I pulled my arm away gently. "You want me to be your messenger? To beg him for the money you squandered?" Her lips trembled. "It's not like that, it's exactly like that," I whispered. For the first time, she didn't argue. She just lowered her gaze, ashamed or maybe just cornered. That night, when I told Grandpa about the encounter, he wasn't surprised. "They will try every angle," he said calmly. "First pride, then desperation, and finally, manipulation. They will try to use you, because you are the bridge they burned but still believe they can cross." I sighed. "So what do I do? Ignore them forever?" "No," he said firmly. "You do not need to ignore them. You need to let them face themselves. You are not their savior, Elena. And I assure you, soon they will be forced to see who they truly are." His words lingered in my mind for days. And then the storm arrived. It happened one late evening. I was walking home when my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "You should tell your family to pay up. Next time, we won't just knock on the door." My heart stopped. They had found me, too. I rushed up the stairs to my apartment, locked the door, and sat in silence. My hands trembled as I held the phone, reading the message over and over. For a moment, fear threatened to drown me. But then another thought broke through. If they had reached me, then the situation was far worse than my parents had admitted. The next day, I called Grandpa. "They're not going to stop," I told him. "Are you sure this will teach them anything? What if something worse happens?" There was a long silence. Then his voice, low and steady. "Elena, sometimes the only way people learn is when their walls collapse. I have been patient. I have been silent. But now it is time." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "You'll see." And I did. Because 3 nights later, Grandpa made his move. The news broke like wildfire. A press release splashed across every financial outlet, every headline. My grandfather, the man my parents had dismissed as old and fading, announced a massive restructuring of his estate. Not only did he publicly cut ties with my father's failing ventures, but he also named me as the official heir to his foundation. The shockwaves were immediate. I watched it unfold on TV, my heart pounding. Reporters swarmed the mansion. Cameras captured my parents' stunned faces as the world learned the truth. The fortune they had counted on, the safety net they assumed was theirs by blood, had slipped through their fingers and landed squarely in mine. My sister's debts, my parents' pride, none of it mattered now. Because in one decisive move, Grandpa had stripped them of the illusion of control. And suddenly, for the first time in my life, I wasn't the forgotten daughter anymore. I was the one they could no longer ignore. The morning after the announcement, I woke to a flood of messages, friends, distant relatives, even people I hadn't spoken to in years. Everyone had seen it. My name was everywhere. Elena Kruss, heir to the Donovan Foundation. I should have been elated, vindicated. But instead, I sat at my kitchen table in silence, staring at my phone as the news played in the background. The world suddenly saw me, but not for who I truly was. They saw me for what I had inherited. Still, I couldn't ignore the satisfaction of watching the cracks widen in my parents' perfect facade. Reporters camped outside their mansion, asking questions they couldn't answer. Mr. and Mrs. Kruss, how do you feel about being excluded from the estate? Was favoritism in your family the reason for this decision? What about your daughter Lila? Will she inherit anything? For once, my parents weren't in control of the narrative. They looked cornered, exposed, like prey under a spotlight, and Lila, she didn't stay silent. Of course she didn't. She took to social media, posting long, emotional rants about betrayal and unfairness. I was always the one who cared for my parents, she wrote. I was the one who sacrificed, who stayed close to the family, while Elena ran off to live her own life. And this is how I'm repaid. My grandfather gifts everything to the daughter who abandoned us. Her words went viral, stirring sympathy from strangers who didn't know the truth. For a moment, the public almost painted her as the victim. But then, people dug deeper. They uncovered the lavish parties, the reckless spending, the debts she had buried beneath a polished smile. Screenshots leaked, photos of her drunken nights surfaced, and suddenly, the tide turned. Entitled, "Spoiled, Irresponsible," the comments grew harsher with every hour, and as her image burned, mine began to rise. Not because I sought the spotlight, but because I had become the contrast. The quiet one, the forgotten one, the one who had worked while she wasted. People love a redemption arc, especially when it comes at the expense of the arrogant. Still, none of it dulled the sting of hearing my sister's words. She painted me as a traitor, a thief, as though I had stolen something that was never hers to begin with. One evening, as I was leaving my office, I found her waiting for me. No cameras, no friends, just her. She looked smaller than I remembered, as if the weight of her crumbling world had finally settled on her shoulders. "Congratulations, Aunt," she spat, though her voice cracked. "You finally got what you wanted. You get to be the hero, the golden child." All because Grandpa decided to rewrite history. I stared at her, my chest tightening. "This isn't about history, Lila. It's about choices. You had everything, and you threw it away." Her eyes blazed. Don't act so innocent. You think I don't see it? You've been waiting for this moment your whole life. Waiting to watch me fall. I swallowed hard. No, I never wanted you to fall. I just wanted to stand without being pushed down. For a moment, silence stretched between us. Then, her voice dropped lower, trembling. They're going to hurt me, Elena. The people I borrowed from. They're not going away. And you're sitting there with Grandpa's blessing and his money. You could fix this. You could save me. I felt my throat tighten. This was my sister, the girl who once braided my hair before school, who laughed with me on summer nights before everything changed. But she was also the woman who had mocked me, excluded me, and helped our parents cut me out like I was disposable. I can't save you from yourself, I whispered. Her face hardened. She stepped back, her voice sharp now. Then don't pretend you're any better than them. You're just as cruel, maybe worse. And with that, she turned and walked away. That night, I sat by my window again, watching the city lights blur through my tears. This wasn't how I imagined revenge. It wasn't sweet or triumphant. It was messy, lonely. When I told Grandpa about the encounter, he listened quietly, then said, "She is flailing, Elena. A drowning person will grab anything even if it drags someone else under. Do not let her pull you with her. Sometimes the most merciful thing you can do is let them face their own storm." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to trust that letting her fall was the lesson she needed. But deep down, a small voice whispered, "What if she never survives the fall?" And I wasn't sure anymore if that would be justice or tragedy. The first sign that things were about to get worse came in the form of silence. Lila stopped posting online. No more rants, no more self-defense, no more public appearances. For someone who thrived on attention, her sudden disappearance was alarming. Then the whispers began. Rumors of men showing up at her apartment. Unmarked cars idling near my parents' estate. Anonymous calls in the middle of the night. My parents tried to dismiss it, pretending everything was fine, but fear leaves marks. It shows in the way a person speaks, in the way their eyes dart to shadows, and soon those shadows began to swallow them whole. It happened one evening when I was leaving work. My phone buzzed. It was my father. His voice was frantic, trembling in a way I had never heard before. "Elena," he said, his breath uneven. "They took her." My heart stopped. "What do you mean, they took her?" "Your sister." His voice broke. They said we have 48 hours to pay back the money, or..." He trailed off, but the silence screamed louder than words. I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles ached. Images raced through my mind, each darker than the last. For all her cruelty, for all her arrogance, she was still my sister. The thought of her in the hands of dangerous men made my stomach twist. "What are you asking me for?" I whispered, though I already knew. "You have the money now," he snapped, desperation sharpening into anger. "You're his heir, aren't you? Use it. Pay them. Do something before it's too late." I closed my eyes, my pulse hammering. Of course, even now, it wasn't about me, or her, or family. It was about money. It always came down to money. When I told Grandpa, he wasn't shocked. He sat there in his armchair, hands folded, eyes steady, as if he had been waiting for this moment. "This," he said calmly, "is the consequence of their greed. It is the weight of choices long ignored." "But, Grandpa," I argued, my voice cracking, "this isn't just about them anymore. It's about Lila. She's in danger. Real danger." He leaned forward, his gaze piercing mine. "And what lesson do you think she will learn if you sweep in with your inheritance to save her?" That no matter how recklessly she lives, someone will clean up her mess. Tears stung my eyes. So what do we just do nothing? Let her. My voice broke before I could finish. Grandpa reached across the table, his hand covering mine. His voice softened. I am not telling you to be cruel. I am telling you to be wise. Help, if you must, but help in a way that teaches, not enables. Sometimes the greatest mercy is not in saving someone from the fire, but in letting them feel its heat enough to never play with matches again. His words gnawed at me all night, and then came the call. Not from my father, not from my mother, but from Lila herself. Her voice was hoarse, trembling, like she had been crying for hours. Elena, please, I don't have anyone else. They're serious. They're not going to let me go until someone pays. I'm scared. Hearing her like that, broken, vulnerable, shattered something inside me. She had never begged me for anything before. Not once in our entire lives. Where are you? I whispered, a muffled sob. I can't say. They're listening. But Elena, please. Don't let them hurt me. The line went dead. I sat in the dark for a long time, foe clutched to my chest, tears sliding down my face. This wasn't the revenge I had dreamed of. It didn't feel like justice. It felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake from. But one thing became clear. If I did nothing, the story would end in tragedy. And I wasn't ready for that, not for her, not for me. So, for the first time, I decided to step into the power Grandpa had handed me. Not just as an heir, not just as the forgotten daughter finally remembered, but as someone who could change the course of this family's fate. The next move would be mine, and it would decide whether my sister lived or became another casualty of the greed that had poisoned us all. I didn't sleep that night. Every second, every heartbeat was filled with a single thought. I have to act. Grandpa had taught me patience, taught me restraint, taught me how to watch and wait. But this wasn't about patience anymore. This was about survival, hers, mine, and even the remnants of a family teetering on ruin. The first thing I did was gather information. I called a few trusted contacts from the business world, people Grandpa had once trusted, people who understood discretion. Without revealing too much, I described the situation. Within hours, I had a network of eyes and ears scouring the city, tracking Lila's location and monitoring every suspicious move around my parents. Then I called Grandpa. They'll be expecting fear, I said. My voice steadied despite the knot in my stomach. But we can't let panic rule us. We need a plan. His quiet chuckle sent chills down my spine. You are finally learning, Elena. The fire does not frighten those who carry the flame themselves. I smiled faintly, imagining the contrast. My sister, desperate and cornered, and me, calm and prepared, standing in the center of the storm. By the next morning, I had a plan. It wasn't reckless. It wasn't a naive rush to save her with money that would only teach her carelessness. It was precise, strategic, and it relied on the very thing my family had ignored for years, thinking ahead. First, I secured Lila's location. Every exit, every street, every shadow was mapped. Then I set traps, not physical, but psychological. Subtle pressure, rumors that the men who held her were being watched, hints that law enforcement and local security networks were already closing in. Fear is a tool, I reminded myself, when wielded carefully. And finally, I confronted my parents. Not with anger, not with words designed to cut, but with undeniable truth. I walked into the mansion that afternoon, my heels clicking against the marble floors. My father looked up, hope and panic flickering in his eyes. My mother clutched a scarf tightly, whispering apologies I hadn't asked for. "I know what you've done," I said calmly, voice carrying across the vast dining room. "I know what you tried to hide. I know where Lila is. And I know exactly how to make sure she comes back safely." They stared at me, frozen. This wasn't the frightened, ignored Elena they remembered. This was a woman in control. "You will follow my instructions," I continued. Every word. "Not because I'm angry, but because I will not tolerate recklessness any longer. This family has spent years pretending that money can substitute for love, and now you are seeing the consequences. You can fix this, but only if you obey." It took a long moment, but finally they nodded. Desperation has a way of teaching humility faster than pride ever could. Over the next 24 hours, the plan unfolded. The men holding Lila were contacted through controlled channels. Their threats were counted, their movements monitored, and gradually, inch by inch, she was guided back to safety. When she finally stepped through the doors of our family home, she was pale, exhausted, and trembling but alive. She didn't say anything at first, just sank into my arms, shaking. I held her tightly, feeling every ounce of relief flood through me. For a brief moment, I let myself forget everything: the anger, the betrayal, the years of neglect. She was my sister. She was safe. And then, just as quickly, I let myself pull back, letting her see my face. "This," I said quietly, "is a lesson. Not from me. From life. From the choices you make. From the people you hurt. You have everything you ever wanted, and yet, you almost lost it all. Do not forget this feeling." Tears filled her eyes, and for the first time, she seemed to truly understand. My parents, standing behind her, were silent. Their faces were pale, their hands trembling. They had watched the same lesson unfold. And unlike me, they had no safety net, no protection, no grandfather's guidance. They had been spectators to their own collapse. I glanced at Grandpa later that night. He simply smiled, eyes gleaming. "You have learned well, Elena. The world is harsh. Families are imperfect. And yet, you stood tall while the rest stumbled. That is power and mercy together." For the first time, I felt the weight of what had truly changed. I wasn't just the forgotten daughter anymore. I was the one who could hold the family together, the one who could teach them without cruelty, the one who could rise above the chaos. And as I looked around the mansion that night, at my sister recovering, my parents humbled, and Grandpa watching quietly from his study, I realized something profound. Revenge had never been about hate. It had always been about reclaiming my power. The next morning, the mansion felt different. Not just because Lila was safe, but because the atmosphere had shifted. There was no pretension, no forced smiles, no unspoken hierarchy that once made me feel invisible. Lila sat at the breakfast table, hunched over her food, quiet for once. My parents hovered nearby, unsure how to behave, as if they had forgotten their own house belonged to all of us. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat down deliberately, letting the silence stretch. Sometimes, words aren't needed. Sometimes, presence itself teaches more than any lecture could. Finally, Lila looked up. Her eyes were red, and the usual arrogance was gone, replaced by something fragile, raw and human. I'm sorry," she whispered. "I don't even know where to start." I nodded slowly. "You start by understanding that life doesn't owe you a second chance, and that trust, once broken, takes more than words to repair." She swallowed hard, tears brimming. "I get it. I really do." I studied her for a long moment. She had been my sister, my rival, my tormentor, and now she was simply a scared young woman who had almost lost everything. Turning to my parents, I said, "And you? You need to understand that favoritism has consequences. Ignoring one child while elevating another creates wounds that don't heal overnight." Their faces were pale, guilt written into every line. My father's voice trembled. We never realized you never cared to," I interrupted gently, but firmly. "And now you've seen the price. Let this be the lesson you never forget." For hours, we sat together, awkwardly navigating the silence that had once been filled with judgment and competition. For the first time, we weren't pretending. For the first time, there was honesty. Days passed, and slowly, the family began to rebuild. Lila started taking responsibility for her mistakes. She contacted the people she had borrowed from, apologized, and worked tirelessly to repay her debts, not through my money, not through my grandfather's wealth, but through her own effort. My parents began to change too. The fear of losing their carefully constructed image had humbled them in ways no lecture ever could. They started consulting me not because they had to, but because they realized I had the wisdom and patience they lacked. And Grandpa, he watched quietly, a smile playing on his lips as he observed the transformation. "Patience, Elena," he said one evening. "You've guided them without anger, without cruelty. That is true power. Not the power of inheritance, but the power of judgment, timing, and restraint. Remember this always." I nodded, finally understanding the depth of his lesson. Revenge had never been about punishment. It had been about clarity, patience, and strength, the kind that could rise above the chaos and set the record straight without destroying the very people you cared for. Lila came to me one night, sitting beside me on the porch. "I don't deserve this," she admitted quietly. "I don't deserve your patience, your forgiveness, your life." I smiled faintly, placing a hand on hers. "None of us deserve life perfectly, but we can choose how to live it. You can't undo the past, Lila, but you can start making better choices now." She nodded, tears spilling silently. "I'll try, Elena. I really will." And for the first time, I felt something I hadn't in years: peace. Not because the world had been fair to me, or because my sister had suffered, or because my parents had been humbled, but because, finally, I had reclaimed my place in the family, not through anger, not through hatred, but through patience, strategy, and self-respect. The inheritance, the favoritism, the betrayals, they were all part of a story. And I had finally written the ending I deserved. The weeks that followed were a slow, steady reclamation of what had once been lost. The mansion no longer echoed with tension or unspoken rivalries. Lila began to rebuild her life, cautiously and humbly, learning the lessons she had once scoffed at. She apologized to people she had hurt, repaid what she owed, and began working on projects to prove her worth, not just financially, but as someone who could be trusted. My parents, too, began to reshape themselves, not fully, perhaps, but enough to admit their mistakes. They stopped competing for appearances and started consulting me, acknowledging my voice in decisions that mattered. And for the first time, I felt the shift. The family was no longer a hierarchy dictated by favoritism. It had become something balanced, grounded. Grandpa called me one evening, his voice warm yet commanding. "Elena," he said, "you have learned more than I ever expected. You have shown restraint, wisdom, and courage. But remember, this is not the end. Power without understanding is dangerous. Compassion without boundaries is dangerous. You must always lead with clarity, not emotion, And never let pride cloud your judgment. I understand, I said softly, the weight of his words settling deep into me. I think I finally do. Good, he replied, because your family will continue to test you, in ways both small and large. But you are no longer the child who waited to be seen. You are the one they now follow. Use this wisely, Elena. For the sake of everyone, including yourself. I hung up, sitting alone on the porch as the night air whispered around me. The city lights twinkled below, distant and constant, and for the first time, I felt truly steady. I had faced betrayal, favoritism, and greed, and I had survived. Not just survived, but thrived. Lila came out a few moments later, sitting beside me. She didn't say anything at first. She just leaned against me, exhausted, humbled, and somehow finally present. I'm grateful, she whispered, tears glimmering in her eyes. I know I don't deserve it, but thank you. I placed a hand on her shoulder, squeezing gently. Don't thank me yet, I said with a small smile. Thank yourself for choosing to learn, to change, and to grow. That is what matters most. And as we sat there together, under the soft glow of the night sky, I realized something I hadn't before. Revenge had never been the goal. The goal had been to reclaim my life, my voice, and my dignity. To rise above the chaos without letting it destroy me. To teach lessons that words alone could never convey. In the end, my family had learned, not because I forced them, not because I shouted, not because I demanded restitution, but because I stood firm, patient, and unwavering. And that, I realized, with quiet satisfaction, was worth more than any inheritance could ever buy. I had found my power. I had found my voice. And for the first time, I had found peace. Thanks for watching. Hoped you liked it. If you watched till the end, please comment revenge, so that we could understand you were with us till the end. As well as, please let us know, where are you watching from? What do you want to hear from us in next video? If you have any incident in your life, please let us know. We would love to share your story. Before leaving, please hit the subscribe button, comment your thought, and share with your nearest and dearest one. See you in the next one. Until to the next one, stay happy.